excited for this. We've been talking about it for a couple of days now. Real Salt Lake honoring the 2009 MLS Cup champ team tonight at Rio Tinto Stadium in preparation for a big game for the squad. LA Galaxy are in town. Jason Kreis is joining me live in studio. Man, I'll tell you what, it's been a while. It feels like it's been even longer, but it's so good to see you, man. How are you?
I'm great, man. I'm really, really great. So happy to be back in Salt Lake. So happy to be in this incredible environment. Look out the window and see those mountains again. It's a fantastic experience to be here. Really, couldn't be happier.
So before we get going, U23s.
Yep.
And you're still doing the scouting and technical stuff with Miami, right?
Yeah. I'm wearing 2 hats, 2 jobs, keep very busy, keep the wife unhappy with how much I'm not at home. But it's been a big challenge, but I've been telling a lot of people, and I think it's definitely the truth, that I'd rather be busy than not busy.
Sure.
So 6 or 8 months ago, I was pretty much not busy. I'm enjoying the challenge of both jobs right now and just trying to enjoy my time. And
I remember when we caught up, and I've been telling people to check out the podcast. It was a really fun conversation, man, and so many RSL fans listened to that and loved it. But I remember the frustration, quite frankly, for both of us at the time, if we're honest. We're both like, hey, what are we doing here? Uh-huh. But it must feel good to be back in the game this way, yeah?
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. It was a difficult 6 months for me. I think a learning 6 months for me as well, that stepped aside and started doing some rehab on some houses, thinking about flipping houses for my next line of work. Uh-huh. So enjoyed that. Really did enjoy kind of the manual labor side of things, and the idea of fixing up things was really enjoyable for me for 6 months. But to get back in soccer now I feel like that's where I belong, and that's where I can benefit the most people the most.
So it's been 10 years. It's so weird for me. I mean, for me, from my vantage point, I imagine that it's strange for you too. I know you loved Salt Lake. I know you loved Utah. And again, I know you love what you're doing now, but let's just start big picture. As you kind of digest that it's been 10 years and now you're back to celebrate that team, what are some emotions as you prepare for tonight?
There's obviously so many emotions, and it's incredible that it's been 10 years. You know, I was here in June with a US U23 camp, and somebody that was working for the club mentioned the idea, and I was like, wait a second, what are you talking about? It's been 10 years, and they're like, yeah, and so it's been quick. It's gone by very, very quickly, and so many emotions that when I think back to those times and think about how hard we were struggling for years to really build the club, to start anew and to establish an identity and to establish a way that we wanted to work, and what was going to be important to us. And so many ups and downs through those first couple of years. It was truly, truly special. I feel like the club was a truly special club. I feel like the community was a truly special community. I feel like all the members of the team were truly special people. So just couldn't be any more proud to have been a part of that whole situation, and to have been a part of what I think was such a special institution at that moment. Okay, so I want to get into some story time. Oh, boy.
And my man, JP, the producer of The Drive here on ESPN 700, he was an RSL original fan. Uh-huh. And I didn't know this when I took the job, but he has proven it to be true with a picture of he and you at Meet the Team Day back at Rice Eccles a long, long time ago. And I'm not sure exactly where I want to start, but I do know that I want to get to this one because I think it's my favorite story about you, and it's how you became manager of this club. Boy. Are you okay if we do this?
I don't know, Spence.
I know, man.
Let's tread lightly.
No, I know, 100%.
Let's tread lightly.
So I think the best way, because you know me, you've known me for a long time, I don't really care. So I think I'm just going to go ahead. I'm going to outline my side of things. Like, this is the first time it's been talked about on public radio. And if at any point you get uncomfortable, just say, look, that's enough. Although I hope you don't say that, because it's such a phenomenal story. And I'm going to do this without running anybody else down.
Thank you.
Let's do it that way.
Yeah.
Let's just say at the time there was some frustration in the locker room.
Yes.
Fair?
Yes, fair.
And again, if something becomes unfair or uncomfortable, just say that's enough.
Okay.
We were in Los Angeles. Fair?
As I remember it, yes.
Chivas just smashed us. Also fair.
Yeah, was it Chivas?
It was Chivas.
The Galaxy. Okay,
no, it was Chivas. They smashed us. It was like the 5th or the 6th game of the season. And I knew probably the only person that knew outside of me and you was my father. Okay? So I knew that my father had tabbed you as material or manager material to take over when you were done.
Yeah,
And
very long story now. We could go into a sidebar here, but go ahead.
At any point, if you want to just take us in one direction, just let me know. Because
I think it's important. I think it's important for people to understand that, 6 months before that, literally 6 months of summer before we played Real Madrid here in Salt Lake, and he pulled me aside on the day before the game. I remember exactly where we were. We were at the Starbucks right across from Trolley Square, and he brought me in and he said, "Hey, what is it that you want to do next?" And I said, "Well, I hope I can play a few more years." He said, "Well, after that." I said, "Honestly, my goal would be to finish my career in a soccer-specific stadium. I'm seeing these soccer-specific stadiums go up. I've heard that there's talk of that happening here. I would love to have 1 year as a professional soccer player playing in a proper place." Okay, well, how about after that? I said, "Well, after that, I really think I would like to get into coaching." And he said, "Well, it's my experience that the most talented players are the ones that oftentimes make the worst coaches." And I think he had some basketball experience with that.
Van Gundy, yeah.
Yeah, somebody that was maybe a former player that didn't do well. He brought up some names I can't remember. And I said, and he wanted me to respond to that. And my response was pretty simple. I never considered myself to be a top player. I was a player that statistically did well. Yeah, I scored some goals.
At the time, you were the leading scorer in MLS history.
Yeah, absolutely. So statistically, I thought I did well. But I really felt that my statistics and my doing well and being the leading scorer in the league, it really had nothing to do with talent.
Sure.
It had everything to do with how badly I wanted it and drive. And so I thought that put me in a different light, because I could see where somebody who's God-given talent can't understand how to develop or teach other players to play well. To learn, to develop. And for me, it was the exact opposite. For me, it was, I think I'm in a unique position where I can really push players to try to get the best out of themselves, because I wouldn't be here if I hadn't done the same thing. So I think I had personal experience to draw off of, and I think it put me in a really good place to be a head coach. And from his point of view, it was like I was hoping he wanted to be a GM. Yeah. Because I think he was pretty unhappy with the GM here in those first few years. Mm-hmm. And so I think he saw me as GM material. And I think I really kind of swayed him over in that 30 minutes or an hour conversation. And so we left there, and we, as your father does, a fantastic visionary. He had already laid out the plan.
Modern day P.T. Barnum. I say that about my pop all the time.
Yeah, so right. I mean, it's, to walk away from an hour and a half with him was like, oh my gosh, you just have so much direction and clarity about what's going to be next. Here's the plan. You're going to retire when you retire. If that's a year and a half from now, that's fine. You will be the assistant coach for Coach Ellinger for a very short period of time until you feel and he feels that you're ready. And then we'll move John to the GM spot.
Yeah.
And so the plan was clear, laid clear, and the path was laid clear. And he even went so far as to talk to Coach Ellinger in the next preseason, because Coach Ellinger came to me in that preseason and said, "I understand what the plan is, and I like it. Yeah. I really like it.
Yeah.
But if you could do me a favor and not tell the assistant coaches about this, because I'm sure they won't feel great about you coming in to be an assistant coach." So everybody was on the same page. What happened was that the whole thing got sped up really, really rapidly over those first 4 games of that year, 2007.
Right. So the conversation that you're referencing took place in 2006, the season before.
Middle of 2006.
So what happened, and I just pulled up the date, so we're sure. So this was April 21st, 2007, Chivas 4, RSL 0. Okay, and in the first 2 games, there was a tie. And so it was a tie and a loss, and then we went to Cali, and Chivas smashed us.
Yeah.
And so after the game, and this is where it gets crazy, because the reason
we have another loss to Colorado, followed right behind that.
Yes.
Home loss to Colorado.
Yep, 2-0.
That was the backbreaker.
Yep, right there. Yep. Good. See?
Yeah.
Not just a hat rack, baby. But the reason I love this story is it says a lot about you, but it also says a lot about my father, about what a visionary he is, and how, I mean, look, I'm biased because I'm his son, but, most friends of mine, like if their dad wants to build something, they build a deck. My dad just builds stadiums and soccer teams and such, and so he's gone now. He's living in London, so he's overseas. He's been gone for a year, and I miss him badly. So this story to me says so much about him, but also says so much about you. So after the Chivas loss, I remember we were in the lobby of the hotel in Carson, California. I think it was like a Marriott or something, and it was you, Chris Klein, and Kerry Talley. It was you 3.
Yeah.
Okay. And then it was me. And I was sitting there talking to the 3 of you, and you were frustrated. And I won't divulge details, not really necessary.
Yeah.
You were frustrated, and it was Chris Klein who By the way, I mean, Prince of a Man, one of your best friends.
Absolutely.
And
he'll be here tonight, actually,
Bill
with
here,
the Galaxy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Still president of the Galaxy, is that
absolutely.
true? And Chris is this, again, Prince of a Man and a great player, too. And Chris made the comment, it's bad and it's not getting better.
Mm-hmm.
And I mentioned something to you about the fact that I was privy to your conversation with my father, and I knew at some point he wanted you to take over.
Yeah.
And then Carrie Talley is the one that made the comment, Jason needs to take over now. And I look at you, and I said, how do you feel? And you alluded to the fact that you'd be open to the possibility, and that's all.
Yeah.
You weren't trying to run John down. You were very respectful of John, and so
the lesson is to people, sometimes you should keep your mouth closed.
But so that night, so I went up to my hotel room, and I called my dad. And I said, look, I just spoke with Chris and Carrie and Jay, and my understanding is it's bad and they don't feel like it's going to get better. And so my dad says to me, he says, call Jason, tell him we're going to make a change. And I went, whoa, like, hold on a second. I'm just sharing with you a conversation with your players. And my dad said, no, call Jason, tell him to call me. And I want he and Kim to come up to our home in the mountains, and we're going to make the change. And so then I call you and I say, hey, here's the deal, man. I know you're not trying to run anybody down, but my dad wants to talk to you. And then you take it from there.
Yeah, so the next thing I knew, I mean, you kind of gave me a warning that he might be coming. So I had spoken to Kim, my wife, about, listen, if this possibility happens, do we want to do this?
Yeah.
I mean, we can certainly back off of this situation. I don't think there'll be any hard feelings. But I kind of interested in the idea, and I want to know your opinion. Because I knew it was going to be a massive strain on our life, actually. To go from being a professional soccer player to being a professional soccer coach is night and day.
Sure.
You're talking about a 2 to 3 hour commitment every day to essentially 24-hour day job. So we did. Your dad had us up for dinner at his house up in, where's that place? Woodland, yeah. Had us up for dinner at the house and essentially laid out the plan. Again, here's what I'm doing. I'm firing the head coach and the general manager tomorrow. I would like to offer you to be the head coach. If you don't want to, it's no problem, But if you do, then we need to make this happen pretty quickly.
Straight from the pitch to the bench, like that.
Yeah.
No buffer period.
Fourth game of the season, captain and playing, and then fifth game of the season, head coach and not playing. And as is typical with your father, it was very, very simple. Do you want to do it? If you do, that's great. If you don't, no problem. I'll go hire a new head coach, and we'll just move on from there. And I just thought at that time, this is too big an opportunity to pass up, as well as the fact that I didn't really want to have a new head coach come in.
Sure.
And, could perhaps go bad. He could perhaps decide he didn't want me here. And so, made the decision there at the dinner table. And we finished dinner, and he said, okay, now come over here to this other table away from the wives, and we'll sort out the contract.
Right.
And it was done. Everything was done and dusted within 15 minutes. And by the time I'm leaving, we're talking about the press conference that's going to happen in 2 days and how that's going to be handled.
And that's how it went down. And then word kind of came down to those of us that had to put the press conference together. And I'll never forget that phone call. And my dad said, hey, I'm firing Steve and John, and I'm hiring Jason as the head coach. And I went, whew! So we're doing this, and press conference is called, and suddenly you go from player to manager in a drop of a hat. It took, like, as you said, a couple of days. And look, you actually were able to get some results early on from a team that wasn't necessarily getting results. And I think pretty early on, people thought that this could work. But my question to you, Jay, is when did you know this could work?
It took me over a year and a half,
really?
Actually. Yeah, for sure. I can remember it was the middle of 2008. I would say the middle. It might have been the first third of the season, something like that, where I'd come home and said to my wife, I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. This is just too hard. This is just too emotionally straining. It is just so up and down and so inconsistent, and trying to get the best out of these guys is so difficult, and making all these choices is so difficult that I want to be done. And she literally convinced me, no, can't do it. I want you to stay until the end of the year. If you get to the end of the year and you still think this way, then we'll figure it out.
I love
quit,
Kim.
And we'll go do something else.
Love your wife.
But so strong, so strong, and I think a little bit clairvoyant in a way.
Sure.
Because I did. I said, okay, I'll do it. We'll stay till the end of the year. I'll keep doing this. I'll keep grinding. And lo and behold, after that moment, we went through the rest of the year and became a really, really good team. At the end of 2008, I arguably, and I still believe this with my whole heart, we should have been in the MLS Cup in 2008. We had a home game against what was New York Red Bulls at the time, and we absolutely murdered them in the game.
That's right, yeah.
But ended up losing 1-0, and they went to the MLS Cup ultimately to lose to Columbus. But I really felt we were the much more deserving team that year.
But to rewind just a little bit, Jay, because not only, you were asked to do a lot. You weren't just asked to manage the team. You had to find some talent.
Yeah.
And I can remember, I think I was talking to Trey, and I said, where's Jay? I haven't seen Jay. He's like, he's in Argentina. And you came back with Fabian.
Yep.
Matias
Montilla.
And I thought Matias was really good, man. I know he didn't stick as long.
He was a solid player.
And on that trip, you found some much-needed talent.
Yeah. Well, let's remember that tonight we'll be honoring and putting his name on the stadium, one Mr. Javier Morales.
And that's why I'm bringing it up.
Yeah.
Everyone should remember, if not for your trip, and I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, it was your call.
Yes.
You were just like, I'm not getting any help on the front office side.
Yes.
I'm gone. And you went down there.
This was one of the things that your father told me that night as well, is that we're not going to have a GM.
Yeah.
We don't have a replacement in place. I will act as your de facto GM, but you need to recognize how busy I am. And so, I can remember the first trade we did and had the long conversation I had to have with your father to convince him to do that trade.
Oh, was that a Cunningham
It was
deal?
the Jeff Cunningham
We were
trade.
actually joking about this because I remember when I heard Jason's trading Jeff Cunningham, and my response was, he scores all of our goals.
Yeah.
What are we going to do?
Exactly what your father said. Let's talk about how we're going to replace the 18 goals
that
he scored last year, and that was a difficult conversation. Your father, I think, tested me very correctly, but I had the answers, or some answers, in my opinion.
When's the last time you talked to Jeff?
Probably that day, actually.
I knew it.
No doubt. But let's finish. I mean, the Argentina story, I think, is a fascinating
100%,
one.
yeah.
So we played in Kansas City. I remember we went to Kansas City. We lost, of course, and I was so frustrated, and can remember talking to a young coach at that time as well, and Kurt Analfo, and asking him, how do you do this? This just seems absolutely crazy that this is so difficult. And then the very next, that night, actually, or it was the next night. It was that night, I boarded a plane to Argentina. It's an all-night flight. I landed the next morning, and through that day, I had scheduled 2 interviews. One of them was with Javier Morales, the first one, and the other one was with Fabian Espindola. And then before I left, the agent that was facilitating all of these interviews asked me to look at Matias Montilla's video. And then, through those 2 interview processes with Javier and Fabian, and looking at that video, came back, and the agent came back like a week later up to Salt Lake, and we sat down and negotiated the contracts for all 3 players. So, incredible. I mean, just incredible that I guess I was probably, the right word is dumb enough, maybe audacious enough, to take all that on in my very first year as a head coach. But incredible learning experiences, and I'm so thankful for the opportunity that was given me.
And you found Javier, who, for my money, is still the best player in history of the franchise.
Yes.
Due respect to you, our first player.
There's no doubt about it. No doubt.
And the nice thing from my seat is that was the first time I saw a soccer player play for us that I felt like could play anywhere.
Yes.
And it was so fun to watch him play, and he'll be honored tonight. So there are a few other things I want to get to, but let's focus on Javi for a second, because not only a great player, but a great, great person, like the nicest dude you're ever going to meet.
Yeah.
And look, I've said it on these airwaves before. I'll say it again. I don't love the way it was handled here at the very end. That's well documented. Yeah. I'm glad that it's going to be rectified a little bit tonight. But what does Javier mean to you?
For me, to sit down with a player when I went down there that day, he was the first interview that I had. We had lunch, and to sit down with a player and be so utterly convinced that this was the right guy happened very, very rarely in my coaching career. I left that lunch thinking, by looking in his eyes and listening to what he said, he's the exact right person that we're looking for here, a guy to come in here and to lead this team from an on-field point of view. Playmaker for us, could be a focal figure for all the players to always give the ball to. And he became, over his years here, as he learned English, he became the real connector of the team. Really could connect the young players with the old players, really could connect the Hispanic players with the American players. He was just such a polarizing and centralizing figure for us that I just couldn't be more proud to have worked with somebody like that, more proud to be able to say, I got to bring him here. Because I think that's one of the moments in my life that I can actually say an I. that, I have to be able to take some credit for some things. Really, really proud to have brought him here and to have been able to let all of Salt Lake City and the entire league see it, not only a special player, but a truly special man.
100%. A couple of other player acquisitions I want to get to. JP, just launch into my ears. Tell me if we need to get to break. At this point, I think we're good. All right. Here's how I knew you were a killer, and I was also concerned for your marriage. When you traded Chris Klein.
Yes.
When you traded Kleiner, because Klein wasn't just a really good player. He was like your boy, like your best friend. And I know Kim was good friends with his wife. And that's because, look, in this business, it's great to have friends, but you have to get results. Sports is a results-oriented business. So when I heard that you were trading Kleiner, I'm like, I remember my response. I said, that's Jason's best friend.
Yeah.
But you made the move.
It was more important than that. It wasn't just my best friend. It was my wife's best friend, was his wife.
Right.
And yes, I think there are, oftentimes I say to people that my commitment to that club was more important to me than anything else. And that was a moment that I think people could look in my eyes and believe me, that I was willing to put anything else aside, to do everything I could to try to make this club successful. A really, really, really difficult decision, and a difficult conversation to actually have to drive back up to Park City and go to his house with my wife to tell them of the decision.
Oh, dude.
And I always took it as a real source of how I wanted to behave, that I have those conversations in person with people, and I wanted to be the first person to have those conversations with those people, not to have them find out about the decision from elsewhere. But it was a funny instance, again, where I show up at his door and he said, "What, you're here to tell me you traded me to the Galaxy?" So he already knew.
Wow.
But the conversation that happened after that was tough for me. He was actually feeling pretty good about it, to go there. Beckham was already there.
Yeah.
A lot of things were happening exciting there. So I think he was excited about the prospect of moving on. We were obviously not excited about the prospect of losing them as close friends in proximity. Mm-hmm. But the truth is, we've stayed really close friends till this day.
And you also needed some punch up front, and Robbie Finley was part of that deal. Robbie was great for you and played for the U.S. men's national team. And I know Sturgis didn't work out, but technically he was a very sound player too. So, you needed to make the deal.
It was a case where I looked at it and said, we need a higher number of good players.
Right.
So if I have the ability to trade one player who's an established guy, leaning towards the end of his career, and pick up two young prospects that I believe are very good players, I think, the net sum gain on that is one that we have to do.
Right.
We have to do. And Robbie obviously went on to have a great career, helped us to the championship. And Nathan actually still continued for many, many years. So he wasn't like a flash in the pan. I don't think he was a mistake at all. But yeah, obviously it was ended up being successful for both parties because, again, Chris Galaxy is now one of the most respected figures in the league and the president of one of the biggest clubs.
So why don't we catch one quick break? We probably should catch one. We do have sponsors that keep our lights on. But, we'll continue with Jason on the other side. Coming up next, there's a short list of people that I think have made a difference, not just for the squad, but for the culture. One of them still playing. He wears number 5. We're going to talk about it. Mm-hmm. Did Garth Lagerwey truly drink 100 beers in one weekend? And Jason Kreis's best DJ Countess story. That's on the other side here on ESPN 700. All right, having a good time on a Wednesday afternoon, 5 o'clock hour of the drive here on ESPN 700. RSL in action tonight. There is a game. It is important, but I'm more excited about what they're doing to honor the 2009 MLS Cup champion team. And the manager of that team, Jason Kreis, is live in studio, and we could probably...
Hold on. I'm not a manager. I'm a head coach.
Wait. Here I think I'm learning the vernacular.
No, we're in the U.S.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can be a head coach here.
Okay, good. But what about kit and pitch and such?
Not for me.
Okay,
no.
Thank you. Here, I think I'm being respectful. Don't you give me that look in there.
You say pitch all the time.
Because I'm trying to be respectful. I had to learn this game like everybody else in my 30s because I wasn't raised on soccer.
Right.
So head coach.
There you go.
Okay, Jason Kreis, the head coach of that club, is live in studio. I feel like we could probably do like 4 hours of radio easily with all these stories.
Probably. Yeah, probably. We'd bore people to death.
No way, man. I think this is fascinating personally. Maybe I'm biased. All right, so last segment we were talking about your trip to Argentina that brought Fabian, Matias, and most importantly, although Fabian played really well for you, was Javier Morales, who's being honored tonight. And I think it's not a unique opinion, the best player in RSL history. But again, the team has some stuff on the line too to try and get 3 points tonight against the Galaxy. So I've said this before. there are very few names that you will list before you get to Kyle Beckerman, as far as the people that really changed the culture here. You're at the top of the list, my father, top of the list, and then you start naming people. And I didn't like Kyle when he was with Colorado because he was a punk.
Neither did I.
But Kyle's the type of guy that you want on your team, right?
Exactly.
And so you made the deal, and two-part question. Take us through that process, and what do you think Kyle has meant to this franchise as he's still playing?
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty cool story, too, actually. Gosh, you know what? Now that I'm sitting here thinking about it, I remember where I was when the trade was actually executed. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I believe that I was actually in Argentina that same trip with Morales and Montilla.
It's a hell of a trip then. Goodness.
Yeah, and because I got a call from John Ellinger. So John had left the club for a couple of weeks, but did ultimately come back and do the GM job for a few months. And he was really pushing this Beckerman trade. And for me, I just remember playing against him. And in fact, I remembered the last time I played against him, which was in a preseason game in Las Vegas, where we literally got in a fight. The two of us did. Not a fist fight, of course, a soccer fight where
sure.
You know, yell at each other and all that kind of stuff.
Right. And then both parties fall down.
Yeah, exactly. And then no, but I was thinking to myself, there's just no way. I can't have this kid here.
Right.
I think it seemed like he had a bad attitude and it seemed, a little bit rough. But what he was and he always has done this, and he still continues to do this. I think he pushes buttons on opponents to get the worst out of them, to get an edge.
Right.
And that's how competitive he is. And so really, John pushed that trade. We traded Mehdi Bellucci away for Kyle Beckerman. And arguably that is the single best trade maybe in MLS history, actually. And I love Mehdi to death. I still think that he was talented in his own right.
Certainly.
But talk about bringing a figure in here that changed things, was a big, big factor in changing things. And I knew it right away. From training session number 1, it was like nobody was going to get by with training less hard than him. And he really, really demanded that of everybody around him, to work harder and to figure out a way to make these training sessions more competitive. It started from the training sessions. It went to the matches. His performance was always about giving everything he could for the team and to try to turn this thing into a winning club. And that crazy, because then not very much longer, here I am, had brought this player here that I didn't really like to giving him the captain's armband. And so he took that well and really, really, I think, has done an amazing job for this club, but an amazing contribution for this community as well.
Quick Kyle Beckerman story real quick to show. And I just remembered this, and this shows you how little I knew about soccer, because I can remember maybe it was Kyle's first year. Kyle scored a phenomenal goal from like 35 yards out. And I had you on the show, and I said, Jay, I think maybe you should push Kyle up top. And you looked at me like you were going to scold me like I was your son. And then you very kindly walked me through why that was a horrible idea.
Well, brings up another awesome story. The end of that first season, between 2007 and 2008, we bring in all the players and we have personal conversations with them about, here's how your year went. Here's what we think your contract situation is going to be, because at that time, almost nobody's on a guaranteed contract. So You're literally telling them whether or not they're going to be back, whether or not you might be trading them, whether or not you're going to protect them if there's an expansion draft. And Kyle comes into that meeting, and it was Garth and me and all the assistant coaches. And Garth was just very new into the club too, so didn't really know much about Kyle. But I'm not kidding you. He showed up with a folded napkin in his hand. In the napkin, he has written down some things that he thinks really should improve about the club, about training sessions, about, whatnot, the locker room, details like that. Because he's the captain, and that's his ability and his right to do that, to have his opinion. And we always were looking for opinions and feedback from the players. But one of his final points was, I think I need to move forward in the pitch.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Huh.
He said, I think I could be a very good number 10 in this league. And I remember the conversation so clearly, because I just felt so crystal clear in my mind. Kyle, you're right. You could be a decent number 10 in the league, but you could be the absolute best holding midfielder in the league if you truly buy into it. And that's the only way you'll ever get to play for the full national team, is if you take this responsibility and you run with it. And he did. And ultimately, it was great to see that he went and represented our country in a World Cup.
Wow, I didn't know that story. That is incredible. And you know what? You just reminded me of a story. I think we could do this all night. And this isn't going to be a comfortable memory for you, but it turned out fine because you mentioned expansion draft.
Yeah.
And you know where I'm going.
Oh, yeah. I know
because I can remember when I heard we were leaving you unprotected.
Yeah.
With the hope. And my poor father, this was the one decision where I could tell it was killing him. But the hope was they wouldn't take you.
Yeah.
They did.
Yeah.
Pretty quick. Like, were you the first pick in the expansion draft? If you weren't, you were right there.
I don't know because I remember where we were. First, let's go back. I had taken a small vacation to Cancun, and I got back from the trip. And those days, your cell phone doesn't work in Mexico unless you want to pay $1,000 or something like this crazy. So I turned it off. And I get back, I'm at the airport, and I open up my cell phone, and I've got voicemail, like several voicemail, and I listen to the voicemail, and one of them's from Coach Ellinger. Jason, I just wanted to let you know that we weren't able to protect you. We left you out there. We believe that they won't take you. This is a calculated risk, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then sure enough, the day comes, and we're at some sort of convention with Zango.
That's right. It was right downtown.
A New Jersey.
This is crazy.
A New Jersey unveil or something.
Yep.
And during the convention, I'm on the stage. I was picked by Toronto, and then the club ultimately had to give way too much money probably to get me back in the team. So as we come off the stage, your dad brings all the players together and said, "I just want everybody to know I have good news and bad news. Which one do you want first?" And of course, we said bad news. Well, we lost Jason in the expansion draft. Yeah. I'm really sorry, Jason, about that. He said, "Well, what about the good news?" Well, we got you back.
Yeah. And then actually that led to the most awkward cheer in history.
You're right.
If you don't remember.
That was
My
awkward.
dad said, "Bring it in." Or I'm like, Dad, don't do this.
That's not a moment we have a cheer about.
Brought it in, probably the wrong time. But just a little backstory on that. So I don't know if that was the straw that broke the back with John Ellinger, but I can remember my dad was not happy because he wanted you around, as we chronicled last segment, not just to play, but to take over as manager.
Yeah.
And so my dad had to write a check to get you back.
Right.
There was more than he wanted to spend. And I don't know if Toronto knew that.
Yes.
But they were able to get allocation money from us to get you back.
Yeah, they knew. I think they certainly knew that I was a player that your dad didn't want to lose.
Yeah.
And they took advantage of it. They did that whole draft. I think they traded back like 7 or 8 of the players that they picked out of the 11.
Yeah.
That was their whole modus operandi, was just to see how much money they could get, or assets, league assets. And I remember the time for me, if I had been the head coach and had made that decision, there's no way I would have paid $125,000. I think it was $125,000 to get me back. Because frankly, at that market, I wasn't worth it, to be honest, as a player. I just wasn't. I only had a year or a year and a half left. I've got 2 torn ACLs that I'm operating on here.
Thanks,
I think your dad had a different vision.
Yeah, no, he did, no doubt. Okay, I want to move to this, and sometimes things are just serendipitous with the way they work out. Because one of the things John Ellinger sold us on is the fact that he could get all these young players to play for him that had played for him in Bradenton, and one of the names was Freddie Adu, and look, at the time, I was just thrilled that I knew who Freddie was. I'm like, sweet, let's get him.
Yeah, that's how the guys is doing all those commercials, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Like he's already a legend.
Awesome.
He must be incredible. Okay, and you don't have to comment on this, but I remember I was so bummed after the trade, and I went to one of the training sessions. I'm like, hey, am I the only one that notices that Freddie's not very good? Like, we were sold a bill of goods. What's going on here?
Yeah.
But attendant to Freddie in that deal was Nick Raimondo, who was, Nicky, if you're listening, he's not, he's training, getting ready, was an afterthought.
Yeah.
Okay, the deal was to get Freddie Adu, and oh, by the way, there's this keeper from D.C., because we had a keeper. His name was Scott Garlick, and Scott was a good keeper. And I'll never forget being in the office and hearing a conference call where Scott Garlick had announced that he was leaving Major League Soccer for a real estate venture. And as we talked about during the break, you understand it because of the way the league was taking players back then, taking care of players back then. But for me, being raised in football and the NBA, I'm like, wait, we live in a league where our goalkeeper will leave us for real estate?
Yeah.
So we actually had to scramble to beg to get Nicky back. Now, I say serendipitous because he's been a legend here, Wall the Wasatch. But what do you remember about that?
Yeah, I would say this. I would say a couple things. It had to be embarrassing. I think it was embarrassing that somebody was going to walk away from being a starting goalkeeper in the highest division of professional soccer in our country to literally go take a job which was commission-based.
Yeah.
I know Scott very well, and I know how hard he struggled his first couple of years in commercial real estate back in Tampa, Florida. Now, thankfully, he's doing very, very well now.
Good.
Doing very well in real estate.
Does he still have the stash?
It goes back and forth.
Great.
A bit of a beard sometimes as well, but it's all gray. But yeah, so you go back into the story, which I think is important, is to say that I don't think Nick would be embarrassed about being people knowing that he was a throw-in on that trade. He was also a bit. Essentially, what happened was John went to the New York Red Bulls. Bruce Arena was the coach, and said, "We need a goalkeeper. You pick which one is going to be." And so Bruce had worked with his team now for several weeks through the preseason, right? Because this happens in the preseason. And he says, "You know what? You guys can have Nick Rimando." Just gave him back, and afterthought said, "I don't want him." And so to think where he was at that moment in his career to what he has done in his career is absolutely incredible. And I think Nick would not be embarrassed about it. I think Nick should be proud about that he could come from where he was then to where he is now. It says something truly special about him. And I think truly special about the people that worked with him as well.
Excellent point. And that leads me to an area that is going to make you uncomfortable. But I think it's important to talk about because, again, you don't have to divulge details as to why you left. But when you left, your friend took over as the manager here. When Jeff took over, and look, we don't have to talk about anything that you don't want to talk about. But I know that was hard.
Yes.
Hopefully, that relationship has been repaired as much as it could be. But if you will, Jay, talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not a problem. That year, 2013, as it were, I was in the last year of my contract. As a starting point, your father had told me that if you ever get in the last year of your contract with me, you should know that you're in a bad place. Essentially, if I trust you and I have faith in you, you won't go in your last year of contract.
Which is
There'll
how
be an
he's
extension.
Always operated, by the way.
Yeah, and so here I was in the last year of my contract and was trying to have a conversation about my extension, hopefully here in Salt Lake. And Deloy was a brand new owner. And so I think Deloy had some misgivings and some trepidations about that. Obviously, I was very connected with your father, and I think Deloy was a little bit, maybe taken aback by that, maybe a little bit, well, you've got to prove yourself under me as well. And I didn't take that well. I didn't take that well at all. And so it became very clear in my mind very early on that I should probably move on. And so I was looking for opportunities. New York City became the absolute best opportunity in my eyes and got fixated on that, in the middle of the season to move on. And as that decision were happening, of course, I wanted to bring my assistants with me, Jeff and Miles in particular, because they had been with me the longest. I had C.J. Brown here as well, but he'd only been with me a couple of years. Made the decision I was just going to bring the two of them. And so we went through that whole second half of that season trying to, okay, are we going to do it? Are we not going to do it? Maybe we'll stay. But thinking the whole time that we were coming as a package. Even went so far as to negotiate some of the money off my contract to get them more money.
Yeah.
To make this a situation that would be ideal for everybody involved. And then at the last moment, Jeff decided that he wanted to stay. And at that moment, I was hurt by it. I was really, really hurt by that decision. Really wanted him, and I think it just come from a security point of view. As a head coach in any professional sport, you need people around you that you can really trust, no matter what. And so not having the ability to have him with me, I think, was what really, really hurt me. But also just a little bit of this thinking that that's how it was going to happen. And how silly is it to be hurt by that when somebody wants to become a head coach here and was given that opportunity? So ultimately, I think that he made the right decision for him. Wasn't great by me. And it was difficult for a while. But, about 6 months later, I came back and said, I want to sit down with you and let's just talk. Let's just open the air. And we're, again, best of friends. He's actually one of my assistant coaches with the USU 23. So we're working together again. Yeah, we're working together again, and everything's great. He's here. We spent last night together. So, yeah, all good.
And it should be said, phenomenal goalkeeper coach, right? One of the best.
For me, not one of the best, the best.
Good.
The best. And I honestly think that because of him is why Nick Rimando's career really took a giant step forward in those first few years.
Awesome. All right, last segment with Jay coming up on the other side. Borlave, we haven't talked about the defenders that you acquired that ultimately allowed you to win the whole thing. And also, what's more memorable, the fact that David Beckham came into the locker room to congratulate you after winning or tried to fight you the next year on the sideline? We'll talk about that. Jason Kreis, live in studio here on ESPN 700. JP's liking the new bumpers on the show today. All right, Jay, we don't have a ton of time, and you need to get going anyway. A quick thought, because I was thinking about the player acquisitions that you made that I didn't get to. Nat and Homison, we can't go any further without mentioning Borlave as they became your two center backs. So quick thought on them.
Yeah, Homison was a player, again, that we made a pretty quick decision on. It was not like us to do this, but we were in the at the combine, the MLS combine actually, and we're sitting down watching video of this guy, and we were just like, let's do it. Yeah. I mean, because here was just a different, special athlete that could really change our perception and how we played, and could really allow us to play a very aggressive way, which we wanted to play high up the field, and he would cover everything behind, and that's what he did. And he needed the right partner next to him. He needed an organizer and an intelligent guy and somebody that could, dictate everybody around him and help him. And that person was the exact right fit in Ned Borchers.
And obviously there's the Chris Wingerts and Ned Grabavoy's and your old buddy Clint Mathis, who came back in Javier Steed when you needed him most. Yep. A quick thought on Clint too.
Yeah, that was 2009, I believe. It was the middle of the year where we brought in Clint Mathis and Robbie Russell. Will Johnson had maybe come in the middle of the year before that, I'm not sure. But they were all mid-season acquisitions and were very, very important players for us through the whole thing. Clint, scored some incredibly critical goals for us, and then had a really, really, really elite performance in the MLS Cup final, and I think arguably was the best player for us on that day to lead us to that championship.
We got to mention Garth too. We have to mention Garth.
Yeah,
I mean, again, we don't have a ton of time here, but Garth was the perfect yin to your yang.
Yeah, it's odd because we were college roommates, not college roommates, college teammates.
Did he really finish 100? Did he really finish 100 beers in one weekend?
Yes, he did.
Okay,
and I saw it and witnessed it.
All right,
I wasn't there to drink them with him, but I did see him on several occasions and thought things were not going to turn out well for him. I was really, really concerned. My wife saw him too, and she was very worried for him.
Sure,
but he made it through alive.
Okay, good.
But yeah, I mean, so in college we were teammates, but we weren't really great friends. And so when he came here, it became a really interesting relationship. I think you said it exactly right. We saw things from almost a completely different point of view. And we had some really, really knockdown, drag-out arguments about things. And again, I think this was part of your father's vision, was to have somebody here that would really argue. Your dad always said, if you've got a bunch of people in the room that agree with you, you've got too many people in the room. That's
why he loved me as his older son, just so you know. That's why it worked out so well.
We had some knockdown, drag-out arguments over things. But ultimately, I think we made pretty good decisions.
So, look, before you get out of here, let me just say publicly how much you mean to my family and how much you mean to me personally, your relationship. When I've been down in the dumps, phone calls from you have really helped me out. Mm-hmm. It's great to see you back here. It's hard for me to talk about this in detail because I wish those years could have lasted for all of us forever.
I think we all do.
And you're one of the few people, when I talk to my father about who he hired and who he worked with, you see the glimmer in his eye, and he misses you, and we all do. But it's great to see you back here, so I hope you enjoy the night.
Thank you very much. I will for sure.
You got it. All right, Jason Kreis, RSL in action tonight, pregame coverage 7.